Today we are going to discuss chapter 5 of David Copperfield. We are going to summarize the chapter in some points so that we can link it to the events of chapter 6. David Copperfield vision on chapter 5. These are the main events of chapter 5. The main events of chapter 5. One. David met Steelforth in London. The second main event, David and Steelforth bigotry. Third main point, Daniel announced the engagement of Ham and Emily, his two orphans, the two children they adopted. Miss Betsy visited David to ask him a particular question. Miss Betsy visited David. Of course, she visited him in London to ask him one main question, one particular question. And this question was about his future job, whether he liked to be a lawyer. Point 5, David practiced to be a lawyer. Of course, this was at Mr. Spillow's office. After that, David had a dinner party. David had a dinner party with Steelforth and two other friends. And in this party, David got drunk. Then David met Agnes after being drunk. They went to the theater, and there David met Agnes in the theater. David met Agnes in the theater. Of course, Agnes saw him drunk, and David was speaking loudly in the theater. And Agnes advised him to let his friends to take him home in the theater. Then David had a note from Agnes inviting him to visit her at her house. Agnes sent a note to David asking him to visit her. In this visit, Agnes started complaining about Uriah and what was he doing with her father. The last important point, Agnes told David about his plans. Agnes told David about Uriah's plans. Of course, these plans were about being the partner of Mr. Wickfield. Now we are done with the main plans. Let's move to chapter 6 and try to summarize the chapter. Not the whole chapter, of course. A part of the chapter, try to summarize it in some main points. Now, of course, we are going to discuss some of the quotations. Now, it's chapter 6. Chapter 6. Main points. One. The first important event in this chapter, David invited Uriah for a cup of coffee. Okay, the next morning David saw Uriah, in London, and then he invited him for a cup of coffee, and Uriah felt very happy to have an invitation to have a cup of coffee with this young gentleman, David. And he said some words that showed that he was happy to have this kind of because of the difference between the two young men. David was a young gentleman, while Uriah was a young man of a low position. And that's why Uriah was very happy to have such an invitation. And it was quite clear through his words or through his conversation with David. He expressed it frankly, in a clear way, saying he was very happy with this kind of invitation. The second main point, Uriah told him about his plans. Of course, David Copperfield, Uriah told David about his plans of being a partner of Mr. Wickfield. And that's why David invited Uriah to a cup of coffee, so that he can reveal or uncover his plans about the Wickfields. Of course, when Uriah talked about this plan, it was because he trusted David as a young gentleman. And he also wanted to know what did David think and what David thought of his plans of being a partner of Mr. Wickfield. He also wanted to see David's reaction about it. Of course, David controlled himself and tried not to show him a clear reaction towards what he said. Let's move to the third point, or the third main event. He told David, or Uriah told David how he saved the wheat field of Mr. Wheatfield. Uriah told David about how he saved Mr. Whitfield's business, and of course this was through doing all the work of Mr. Whitfield, while Mr. Whitfield was almost wrong. He was almost wrong because he tried to forget about his wife's death. And of course, Uriah took advantage of this circumstance and tried to plan to be Mr. Whitfield's business. Of course, he told David that he was doing it for the good of Mr. Whitfield, while we know that he did it for his own evil purpose. Let's move to the next point, which is David wanted to, as a reaction, at the end of the conversation, David wanted to hit Uriah in his face, or in his ugly face, for what he said and what he planned. But he couldn't do it. Do you know why? Because he remembered Agnes' request of being, she asked him to be polite with Uriah. And that's why he stopped himself from hitting his ugly face. Of course, David was so angry about what Uriah told him, about his plans, about planning to marry Agnes in the future. But it was something good of David that he could control himself and responded to Agnes' request of not doing something bad to Uriah. Let's move to the next point. David decided not to tell Agnes about Uriah's plans. And in fact, this was a wise thinking of David, not to tell Agnes about what Uriah told him about Uriah's plans. David decided not to tell Agnes about Uriah's plans. And here we have an important question. Why didn't David want to tell her about this plan? Because Agnes had already enough troubles. She had enough problems to think of. And we can see that David started to think wisely because he became an adult or a young man. Let's move to the next point. Invited David to his house. Of course, we know that Miss Betsy came to London and asked David about a particular question about his future of being a lawyer, and he liked the idea, although he didn't think about it, but he liked the idea. And then Miss Betsy had a plan to send David to Mr. Spillow's office to practice as a lawyer, of course. And after a year of this practice, Mr. Spillow started to trust David, took him as a friend, and as a result, he invited him to his house, to visit Mr. Spillow's house. Mr. Spillow invited David to his house. And of course, this house was a large house, and it showed David that Mrs. Spillmore was a rich man. In the house, David could see that there was a picture of Mrs. Spillmore's wife. Later, we will find out that this wife died, okay? And she looked like their daughter. Let's move to the next point. David saw, David knew that Mrs. Spillmore's wife was dead. David, after this visit, David knew that Mrs. Spillmore's wife was dead. Okay? Of course, he saw a picture of hers onto the wall, and then he figured out that this must be his wife. The next point, David saw Dora, and this is an important point. David saw Dora, and Mrs. Spillmore's daughter. Of course, this was the first time for David to see her, Mrs. Spillmore's daughter. He fell